Shabbos Kodesh, Shabbos, Shabbos Kodesh. Oy, oy, oy. Shabbos Kodesh, oy, yismechu b'malchuso, yismechu b'malchuso. Shoy le Shabbos lekoide, oide, lekoide, oide. La 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 la
Shabbos Kodesh, ya da 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 da. A good Shabbos, my holy sisters and brothers. It's Friday, thank God. Shabbos is almost here. It's a winter Shabbos, so it's only a few hours away. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us? We have such a colorful daf today. We're going to just be digging deep on the verses of the Book of Esther, the opening, the big party of King Ahashverush. I'm sort of reminded of Howard Stern years ago did a bit where he explained that when he was a kid, they had the guy come to their public school to give the anti-drugs message, and he sort of explained how all the drugs were bad, and this drug is bad, and that drug is bad, and this drug is bad, and this is why this drug is bad. And Howard said, he was just left with the idea, I want to do those drugs. So, we do have this command that we discussed already a week ago, that one is commanded to get drunk on Purim. But as we've seen, there's various interpretations of what that means. Maybe just have a little extra alcohol so you fall asleep a little earlier. Or, some interpret it that you should really become intoxicated, but for the purpose of celebrating in the salvation of God and Torah. And you just do it that one day a year. Now we're actually getting into the Purim story itself. And it opens with this massive feast that King Ahashverush threw for the whole world, seemingly, at least the nobles and princes of the world. And it was excessive use of alcohol, excessive abuse of alcohol that led to all kinds of major problems. And definitely it's meant to be a cautionary tale, as we'll hear from our sages. Who is with us as we gather to do some beautiful midrashic learning here on Daf Yud Beis, page 12 of Tractate Megillah, the 11th volume of the Talmud. Yehuda in South Carolina, Pauline in Arkansas, Jose in Miami Lakes, Renelle says shalom, Jen in Southwest France. Welcome, Jen, from across the pond. Lucy in Minnesota, Christo in Lubbock, Guy in Ohio, Christo in Lubbock. These episodes really keep me up with Daf Yomi. Couldn't manage this nearly as well on my own. Thank you, Christo. And Eliseo from Rosemead, California. And over there on the YouTube side, Lynn checking in from North Texas. All right, today's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by Shaya Atlas for Hatzlacha for me and my family. Shaya, may you have way more success than even you with your ample imagination could conceive. You and all your loved ones should be showered in blessings, and we say amen. Thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. It is our annual campaign. It's winding down. We have a ways to go. If you've been thinking about donating, this is the time. Donations are matched thanks to our generous matchers. So get in there now. Donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. All right. Let's get going. So we pick it up right near the top of Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph on the A side of page 12. This is an extended Midrash and Agadata interpretations by our sages based on various verses from the Book of Esther and connecting to other verses elsewhere in the Bible. All of this is based on Mishna number 13 here in chapter 1, an extended period of storytelling and interpretation here in this part of Masechet Megillah. Rava said, Daniel also erred in his calculation. Where we left off yesterday is the sages were talking about, Jeremiah prophesied that the exile after the destruction of the first temple would last 70 years. And then the wicked king Belshazzar thought, well, the 70 years are up. I can use the golden vessels that were used in the ceremonies of the Holy Temple for my own parties right here in the palace. And then he was destroyed for his impertinence. So now Ahashverush wants to use those same golden vessels, but he figures, okay, Belshazzar calculated wrong. This period of the 70 years, now it has elapsed. The Jews haven't been redeemed, so that prophet Jeremiah must have been wrong. And based on this question, the sages have done various interpretations of how we count the 70 years. So Rava said, Daniel from the book of Daniel, also erred in this calculation, as it is written, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, meditated in the books over the number of years, whereof the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish for the desolations of Jerusalem 70 years. That's Daniel 9:2. From the fact that he said, I meditated, a term indicating recounting and calculating, it can be inferred that he had previously erred. In other words, it wasn't clear what the 70 years meant. From where do we count? Similar to the idea that God told Abraham, that your descendants would be enslaved in Egypt 400 years, but it wasn't 400 years. From when was the 400 years counted? From when Abraham received that prophecy, not from when the Jews entered Egypt, nor from when the Jews became enslaved in Egypt. So this kind of idea, from where do we count, requires exploration. So Rava said in response, that he had previously erred. And so the Gemara comments, in any case, the verses contradict each other with regard to how the 70 years should be calculated. In one verse it is written, after 70 years are accomplished for Babylonia, I will remember, Efkod, you, and perform my good word toward you in causing you to return to this place. That's Jeremiah 29:10, which indicates that the 70 years should be counted from the Babylonian exile, from when the Jews were exiled out of the Holy Land. But in another verse it is written that he would accomplish for the desolations of Jerusalem 70 years, indicating that the 70 years are calculated from the destruction of Jerusalem, a different date. So Rava said in response, the 70 years that are accomplished for Babylonia were only for being remembered, lifakida, as mentioned in the verse, allowing the Jews to return to Eretz Yisrael, but not to build the temple. And this is as it is written with regard to King Cyrus's proclamation permitting the Jewish people to return to the land of Israel in the 70th year after the exile. So he allowed the Jews to return. That doesn't mean that the temple was, that it was even commenced immediately, its reconstruction to the second temple, nor certainly that it was finished. It took quite a while for the second temple to be finished. Thus says Cyrus, the king of Persia, in Ezra 1:2, the Lord, God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged, pakad, me to build him a house in Jerusalem. And the verse makes use of the same root, pet kuf dalet, from pakad and lifkedah, right? F and P are the same letter in Hebrew. So the verse makes use of the same root, pet kuf dalet, heralding the return to Jerusalem to build the temple, but not its actual completion. Apropos its mention of Cyrus, the Gemara states that Rav Nachman bar Rav Hista interpreted homiletically a verse concerning King Cyrus. What is the meaning of that which is written? Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have held. Now, this word anointed, don't forget that anointed is Mashiach, right? The word Messiah in Hebrew, Mashiach, what it actually means is one who is anointed by God. Just as the high priests assume their office by being anointed with the oil of anointing, and the kings of Israel assume their kingship by being anointed with the oil of anointing. On a much higher level, right, God's chosen one that will eventually come down and change the world into the Messianic age is the anointed one. So how is it possible that in the book of Isaiah, when we are talking about Cyrus, right? So Cyrus in Hebrew, Koresh. So LeKoresh Asher azikto bim, where is it? Koresh Mashiach, right? I'm sorry, where is it? Lim Shichoi. Okay, so Cyrus, Koresh is referred to as Lim Shichoi, the one who is anointed. Now, is Cyrus the Messiah? Is he the anointed one? Is he Mashiach? Obviously not. So says the Gemara, now was Cyrus God's anointed one, i.e. the Messiah, that the verse should refer to him in this manner? Rather, the verse should be understood as God speaking to the Messiah. Right? The Messiah is coming in the future, but he's already been selected since the beginning of time by God up in heaven above. So God is already watching events down on earth with Mashiach by his side. What a beautiful image. And so according to Rav Nachman Bar Chizda, he says the verse should be understood as God speaking to Mashiach with regard to Cyrus. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to the Mashiach, I am complaining to you about Cyrus, who is not acting in accordance with what he is intended to do. I had said, he shall build my house and gather my exiles. See Isaiah 45:13. But he did not carry this out. Rather, he said, whoever is among you of all his people, let him go up to Jerusalem. He gave permission to return to Israel, but he did not do more than that. This image, it's colorful, it's provocative, it's interesting, it's a little bit disturbing. God complaining to Mashiach like, well, I set things up so that it would happen in a good way, but what can I do? The people did it a different way, or this king did it a different way. Is God not in control of everything? Why would God have occasion to complain to one of his companions in heaven, even if it's Mashiach? It's just left at that. It's an open question. It's very interesting. Please understand, we have an absolute rock-solid faith that God controls everything. But as Rabbi Akiva said, it's the great paradox. God controls everything and free will is given, right? So it was never meant that this world would be some kind of a model of perfection where everything would be good all the time. Because there's evil in the world, because people make terrible choices all the time, opportunities are created for us to do good, for us to make repair, for us to climb higher, for us to make amends for our mistakes, etc. And all of that is part of God's plan as well. And so maybe it's sort of like, well, look, I set the table. It could have happened in that generation, Mashiach, and you could have been sent in then, but, the people didn't merit, and it's going to have to wait. And it's going to have to wait. Maybe many times the table was set and Mashiach could have come, but we blew it in some way. And so it's all being held off to some future time as God originally foresaw. And yet there's this idea that even though God knows the outcome of things, he accompanies us in all our difficulties and sort of lives them along with us, as it were. It doesn't matter that he knows the end of the movie and that everything is going to work out okay. He knows that we don't see that. We don't know when that's going to happen. We suffer in this world, and God suffers along with us. New subject. The Gemara returns to interpretations of the verses of the Megillah, the Book of Esther. The Megillah mentions that among those invited to the king's feast were the army of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces. Esther 1:3. Now we're very, very slowly going to be making our way through the opening verses of the Book of Esther, with lots of sages explaining what these verses really mean. So the army of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces, and it is written near the conclusion of the Megillah at Esther 10:2 in the Book of Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia. So why is Persia mentioned before Media at the beginning of the Megillah, while at the end of the Megillah, Media is mentioned before Persia? And Rav has said in response, these two peoples, the Persians and the Medes, stipulated with each other, saying, if the kings will come from us, the ministers will come from you. And if the kings will come from you, the ministers will come from us. Therefore, in reference to kings, Media is mentioned first, whereas in connection with the nobles and princes, Persia is given priority. And this is historically accurate. Cites Rav Steinsaltz. Although the Persian Empire began with Cyrus's decisive victory over the Median Empire, in truth, Cyrus brought about a situation in which there were two nations sharing the throne. He appointed Medes to prominent positions in the country, even among the ranks of the highest authorities. Statues from the period include soldiers of the king of Persia lined up in pairs, one Persian and one Median. And the verse states, Esther 1:4, when he, meaning Ahashverush, showed the riches of his glorious kingdom, the kavod of his kingdom, and the honor of his majestic greatness, and the word for that is tiferes. So kavod and tiferes, these are words we're really familiar with, often used with reference to God and the holy things of the temple. And Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina said, this teaches that Ahashverosh wore the priestly vestments, right? When the first temple was destroyed and Nebuchadnezzar sacked the temple and he took the golden vessels and the clothing of the priests and brought it back, just like the Romans would do it when the second temple was destroyed, about 500 years later. When Nebuchadnezzar did it, he took the stuff to his capital. Then the Persians defeated the Babylonians. And so now Ahashverosh had in his treasury the priestly vestments from the Holy Temple. And at his party, to show how powerful he was and how, even God wasn't going to strike him down for doing this, he wore the priestly vestments. And proof for this assertion may be adduced from the fact that the same terms are written with regard to the priestly vestments, as it is written here, the riches of his kavod kingdom, his glorious kingdom, and the honor of his majestic tiferet greatness. And it is written there with regard to the priestly garments, for glory, kavod, and for majesty, tiferes. The verse states, and when these days were fulfilled, the king made a feast for all the people that were present in Shushan, the capital. Now we're in Esther 1:5. Rav and Shmuel disagreed as to whether this was a wise decision. One said, Ahashverosh arranged a feast for the residents of Shushan, the capital, after the feast for foreign dignitaries that preceded it, as mentioned in the earlier verses, indicating that he was a clever king. And the other one said, it is precisely this that indicates that he was a foolish king. The one who said that this proves he was a clever king maintains that he acted well when he first brought close those from more distant, the more distant subjects by inviting them to the earlier celebration, as he could appease the residents of his own city whenever he wished. And the one who said that he was foolish maintains that he should have invited the residents of his own city first, so that if those faraway subjects rebelled against him, those who lived close would have stood with him. Where are you going to focus your attention when you're a leader about, rewarding those who are already closest to you and by endearing them even more? Or are you going to focus on the ones that you still need to build bridges with and bringing them closer? Obviously depends on the situation. The students of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai asked him, for what reason were the enemies of the Jewish people a euphemism for the Jewish people themselves when exhibiting behavior that is not in their best interest? For what reason were the enemies of the Jewish people in that generation deserving of annihilation? Over the course of the Book of Esther, Haman will convince the king to issue a decree that all the Jews in the world will be killed on one day. What did the Jews of that generation do that they should deserve to have this decree hanging over their heads? And he, Rabbi Shimon, said to them, say the answer to your question yourselves. They asked him, he said, well, what do you think? They said to him, it is because they partook of the feast of that wicked one, Ahashverush, and they partook there of the forbidden foods. They went to the party and they ate non-kosher food. And Rabbi Shimon responded, well, if so, those in Shushan, the Jews in Shushan, should have been killed in punishment, but those in the rest of the world who did not participate in the feast should not have been killed, nor threatened to be killed. They said to him, well then, Rabbi Shimon, then you say your response to our question. He said to them, it is because they prostrated before the idol that Nebuchadnezzar had made. As it is recorded that the entire world bowed down before it, except for Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah from the book of Daniel. They said to him, but if it is true that they worshipped idols and therefore deserve to be destroyed, why was a miracle performed on their behalf? The Jews were not annihilated in the book of Esther. In fact, none were. Is there favoritism expressed by God here? In other words, Jewish exceptionalism? Are the Jews just being singled out? That they did something bad, they should have been destroyed, but God didn't destroy them? Why? And he said to them, well, they did not really worship the idol, but pretended to do so only for appearance, acting as if they were carrying out the king's command to bow down before the idol. And so too, the Holy One, blessed be he, did not destroy them, but did act angry with them only for appearance. He too merely pretended to desire to destroy them, as all he did was issue a threat. But in the end, the decree was annulled. And this is as it is written, Lamentations 3:33, for he does not afflict from his heart willingly, but only for appearance's sake. Now you can take that a lot of different ways, that God makes an example of the Jews in the world before the rest of the nations. Or you can think of it as, we all are souls, we are eternal beings, so all the suffering that we endure in this world is to learn from it. But alongside of our eternal lives, when we return to the world of souls, it's like it wasn't that bad. Perhaps the more we suffer here, the more we will learn of compassion, and other kinds of lessons that we can bring with us when we return to the world of souls. The verse states, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. This big feast that he made at Esther 1:5 was in the court of the garden of the king's palace. And Rav and Shmuel disagreed with regard to how to understand the relationship between these three places, court, garden, palace. One of them said, presumably Rav, the guests were received in different places. One who, according to his stature, was fit for the courtyard was brought to the courtyard, and one who was fit for the garden was brought to the garden, and one who was fit for the palace was brought to the palace, right? It was kind of concentric VIP rooms, VIP suites, depending on how much of a VIP you were, how close to the king you would come in this massive feast. And the other one, presumably Shmuel, said, he first sat them in the courtyard, but it did not hold them, as they were too numerous. And he then sat them in the garden, but it did not hold them either, until he brought them into the palace, and it held them. So this is kind of the opposite. First, he started in a private place, but the party just got bigger and bigger. It spilled over into a bigger space, and it spilled over into an even bigger space. But it did not hold them. And a third understanding was taught in a Baraisa. He sat them in the courtyard, and he opened two entranceways for them, one to the garden and one to the palace, all just one big party. And the verse states, Esther 1:6, there were hangings of hur, karpas, and sky blue. And the Gemara asks, what is hur? And Rav said, it's a fabric fashioned with many holes, chare, similar to lace. And Shmuel said, he spread out for them carpets of white wool, as the word chavar means white. And what is karpas? Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina said, cushions, karim, of velvet, pasim. And the verse states, on silver rods and pillars of marble, the couches were of gold and silver. It is taught in a Baraisa. Rabbi Yehuda says, some couches were of gold and others of silver, and one who according to his stature was fit for silver sat on a couch of silver, and one who was fit for gold sat on one of gold. But Rabbi Nehemiah disagrees. He said to Rabbi Yehuda, this was not done. If so, you would cast jealousy into the feast, for the guests would be envious of each other. Rather, the couches themselves were made of silver, and their feet were made of gold. And the verse continues, upon a pavement of bahat and marble. And Rabbi Asi said, with regard to the definition of bahat, these are stones that ingratiate themselves with their owners, as they are precious stones that people are willing to spend large amounts of money to acquire. And similarly, it states elsewhere that the Jewish people will be likened to precious stones, and the Lord their God shall save them in that day as the flock of his people, for they shall be as the stones of a crown glittering over his land. That's from Zechariah 9:16. And the verse concludes, Esther 1:6 concludes, and dar and socharet. And Rav said, dar means many rows, dare, around. And similarly, socharet is derived from sechor, around and around, meaning that the floor was surrounded with numerous rows of bahat and marble stones. And Shmuel said, there is a precious stone in the seaports, and its name is Dara. And Ahashverush placed it in the center of the feast, and it illuminated the festivities for them as the sun illuminates the world at midday. It was like a massive disco ball in the middle of the party. And he explains that the word soharet is derived from tzohar, a light. A scholar from the school of Rabbi Yishmael taught a Baraisa. This means that he proclaimed a remission for all the merchants, absolving them from paying their taxes, understanding that the word dar derives from deror, freedom, and soharet from socher, merchant, freedom for the merchants. And the verse states, Esther 1:7, and they gave them drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse, shonim, from one another. And the Gemara asks, why does the verse use the term shonim to express that they are different? It should have said the more proper term, mishunim. And Rava said, a divine voice issued forth and said to them, the early ones, referring to Belshazzar and his people, were destroyed because they used these vessels, the vessels of the holy temple, and yet you use them again, shonim. And the verse continues, and royal wine in abundance, Rav, abundance. And Rav said, Rav comments on the word Rav, this teaches that each and every guest at the feast was poured well-aged wine that was older, Rav, than himself in years, was greater in years. And the verse states, and the drinking was according to the law, none did compel. That's Esther 1:8. And the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of according to the law? And Rabbi Hanan said in the name of Rabbi Meir, the drinking was according to the law of the Torah. The drinking was according to the law of the Torah. What does that mean? Just as according to the law of the Torah, with regard to offerings brought in the holy temple, the food sacrificed on the altar is greater in quantity than the drink, for the wine libations that accompany the offerings is quantitatively much smaller than the volume of the sacrificial offerings they accompany, so too, at the feast of that wicked man, we say that phrase several times, the feast of Ahashverush is called the feast of that wicked man, the food was greater in quantity than the drink. And the verse states, none did compel. What does that mean, none did compel? Like normally at these parties, you're compelled to get drunk, but here you weren't compelled? What does it mean? Rabbi Lazar said, this teaches that each and every guest at the feast was poured a drink from wine of his own country, so that he would feel entirely free as if he were in his home country. And the verse continues, that they should do according to every man's pleasure. And Rava commented on the literal meaning of the verse, which is referring to two men, a man and a man, ish va-ish, and said, the man and man whom they should follow indicates that they should do according to the wishes of Mordecai and Haman, the hero and the villain of the story. The two of them served as butlers at the feast, and they were in charge of distributing the wine. Why is the verse interpreted in this way? Mordecai is called man, as it is written, there was a certain Jewish man, Ish, in Shushan the castle, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Yair. And Haman is also called man, as it is states, a man, Ish, who is an adversary and an enemy, the evil Haman. And the verse states, also Vashti the queen made a feast for the women in the royal house, which belonged to King Ahashverush. That's at Esther 1:9. And the Gemara questions why she held the feast in the royal house, a place of men, rather than in the women's house, where it should have been. And Rava said in response, the two of them had sinful intentions. The king Ahashverush and his wife, the queen Vashti, were licentious people. Ahashverush wished to fornicate with the women, and Vashti wished to fornicate with the men. They wanted to have an orgy. And this explains the folk saying that people say, he with pumpkins and his wife with zucchinis. Not that they want to have sex with the vegetables, but rather indicating that often a man and his wife engage in similar actions. And we have an explanatory note, he with pumpkins and his wife with zucchinis. The central point is that a man and his wife usually act in the same fashion. They have the same morality. And Rashi explains that just as Ahashverosh wished to exhibit his wife's beauty to everyone, she similarly intended to show off her beauty. Not he wanted to show off her beauty, she wanted to show off his beauty. Rather, he wanted to show off her beauty, and she wanted to have her beauty shown up. And others explain the particulars of this idiom, that if a man will have immoral relations under the wide pumpkin leaves, his wife will act similarly, but under zucchini leaves, which is a more observable and public fashion. Heavy stuff. The verse states, on the seventh day, now we're in Esther 1:10, when the heart of the king was merry with wine. And the Gemara asks, is that to say that until now his heart was not merry with wine? Did it take 7 days for him to achieve merriment? And Rava said, the seventh day was Shabbos, when the difference between the Jewish people and the non-Jews is most apparent. On Shabbos, when the Jewish people eat and drink, they begin by occupying themselves with words of Torah and words of praise for God. Right? Friday night dinner, we make Kiddush. We bless God. We thank God. We we recite verses from the Bible, and then we eat. But the nations of the world, when they eat and drink, they begin only with words of licentiousness. Certainly the pagan peoples of the world back then. And the Gemara continues to detail what occurred at the feast. So too, at the feast of that wicked man, Ahashverosh, when the men began to converse, some said, the Median women are the most beautiful, while others said, the Persian women are the most beautiful. Ahashverosh said to them, the vessel that I use, by which he meant his wife, right? Nice guy, nice husband. The vessel that I use is neither Median nor Persian, but rather Chaldean. Do you wish to see her? And they said to him, yes, provided that she be naked. They're all drunk and awful. For we wish to see her without any additional adornments. And the Gemara comments, Vashti was punished in this humiliating way, for it is with the measure that a man measures to others that he himself is measured. Let's say that one again. Very good little piece of wisdom. It is, in fact, I want to highlight that because I'm going to share that as a meme at a future date. Hold on a second. I'm going to just repeat that after I highlight it. For it is with the measure that a man measures others that he himself is measured. And that is, just the Gemara comments, right? So the voice of the Gemara. We're not sure which sage is saying that. In other words, God punishes individuals in line with their transgressions, measure for measure. And this teaches that the wicked Vashti would take the daughters of Israel and strip them naked and make them work on Shabbos. Therefore, it was decreed that she be brought before the king naked on Shabbos. And this is as it is written, Esther 2:1. After these things, when the wrath of the king Ahashverush was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what was decreed against her. That is to say, just as she had done with the young Jewish women, so it was decreed upon her. The verse states, but the queen Vashti refused to come, right? You've got the scene from the Book of Esther. The king is having this massive party. He's invited the VIPs, the nobles and princes from around the world. They're all there. They're all partying. They're all super drunk. They start bragging about the women from their countries. He says the most beautiful of all is my queen, and she's a Chaldean. They say, bring her out. And then because it says in the Book of Esther that she came out wearing the crown, we understand that she came out wearing only the crown. He forced her to come out naked and humiliated her in front of all the nobles of the world. Nice way to treat the queen of the greatest empire the world had ever known. So the verse states, but the queen Vashti refused to come. The Gemara asks, since she was immodest, as the master said above, that the two of them had sinful intentions, what is the reason that she did not come? If she was so immodest, she was so into this public displays of nudity and sex and stuff. So when you invited her to come out naked in front of all his drunk buddies, why didn't she come? Rabbi Yosef Bar Hanina said, this teaches that she broke out in leprosy, and therefore she was embarrassed to expose herself publicly. An alternative reason for her embarrassment was taught in a Baraisa. The angel Gabriel came and fashioned her a tail. In other words, something was wrong with her physical appearance, and she didn't want to come out naked, not because she didn't want to be seen naked by all these drunk guys, but she didn't want to be seen naked by all these drunk guys when she had some kind of, a pimple or a blemish or something that was temporarily wrong with her. Why do we ascribe this, blemish to the angel Gabriel? Because recall that it's this very thing that the queen refused to come, which leads to King Ahashverush throwing her out, right? And now he needs a new queen, and it's that search for the new queen that leads to Esther being elevated to the queen of the greatest empire the world had ever known. And then she's in position to save the Jews from the evil decree of Haman. So God is not mentioned in the whole book of Esther, but we understand that the whole Purim story is one of God's hidden hand orchestrating events. And right here at the beginning, Vashti going seemingly against her slutty nature and not coming out sets the table, as it were, for all the events that follow. The verse continues, therefore the king was very wrathful, and his anger burned in him. That's Esther 1:12. And the Gemara asks, why did his anger burn in him so greatly, merely because she did not wish to come? And Rava, might have said, okay, she doesn't want to come out parade naked in front of my friends, fair enough. But no, his anger raged in him. Why? And Rava said, Vashti not only refused to come, but she also sent him a message by way of a messenger, saying, you, son of my father's stableman, Ahuriyare, right? So Belshazzar, my father, remember, Vashti is the daughter of Belshazzar, a great, great king. Vashti, she said, you are nothing. You're the son of my father's stableman. Belshazzar, my father, drank wine against 1,000 men, and he did not become inebriated. As the verse in Daniel 5:1 testifies about him, Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords and drank wine before the 1,000, and that man, referring euphemistically to Ahashverush himself, has become senseless in his wine. So due to her audacity, immediately his anger burned in him. She said, you can't hold your booze. That's why you're telling me to do this. You should be like my father who could hold his booze. And that was the wrong message to send to King Ahashverush. Esther 1:13. Then the king said to the wise men who knew the times. And the Gemara asks, who are these wise men? These men who knew the times. These wise men are the sages of the Jewish people. who are referred to as those who knew the times, for they knew how to intercalate the years and fix the months of the Jewish calendar. And Ahashverush said to them, "Judge her for me." Why would King Ahashverush ask Jewish sages? What are these Jewish sages even doing there that he would say, "Judge the queen for me"? But remember, when the Jewish people were exiled from the Holy Land in the Babylonian exile, they were all brought to Babylonia, which then became Persia and Media. Everyone was taken, particularly the upper class, and the most respected, most revered in the Jewish people were the sages of Israel. And they were actually treated with respect in Persia because they were famous for being wise. And so, at least in this homiletic reading, Ahashverosh says to them, okay, what should be done with this queen? Now, these guys are wise, right? So they know that this actually smells like a trap. What did they say to the king? The sages said in their hearts, "What should we do? If we say to him, 'Kill her,' so tomorrow he will become sober, and then he will come and demand her from us. On the other hand, if we say to him, 'Well, let her be,' but she has scorned royalty, and that cannot be tolerated." Consequently, they decided not to judge the matter, and they said to him as follows: "From the day that the temple was destroyed and we have been exiled from our land, counsel and insight have been removed from us, and we do not know how to judge capital cases, as they are exceptionally difficult. Go to the people of Ammon and Moab, who have remained permanently settled in their places, like wine that is settled on its lees. And so their minds are settled as well. We're not fit to judge the queen. You should talk to the people from Ammon and Moab." And they provided a good reason when they spoke to him, as they proved that one who is settled retains his reasoning. For it is written, Jeremiah 48:11, "Moab has been at ease from his youth, and he has settled on his lees, and has not been emptied from vessel to vessel, neither has he gone into exile. Therefore his taste has remained in him, and his scent is not changed." Ahashverosh immediately acted on their advice and asked his advisors, as it is written, and next to him were Karshena, Shetar, Admata, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan. That's Esther 1:14. So Rabbi Levi said, the entire verse listing the names of the king's advisors is stated on account of offerings. Each name alludes to an aspect of the sacrificial service that was unique to the Jewish people, which the ministering angels mentioned as merit for the Jewish people. It's getting late, so I'm not going to go through the explanation of how the names of those advisors reflect various aspects of the temple service, but the words are similar. Then we come to this advisor Memucan. Memucan, right? So Memucan, Esther 1:16, and a sage taught in a Baraisa, Memucan is Haman. And why is Haman referred to as Memucan? Because he was prepared, Muchan, to bring calamity upon the Jewish people. And Rav Kahana said, from here we see that the common man jumps to the front and speaks first. For Memucan was mentioned last of the king's 7 advisors, and nevertheless he expressed his opinion first. Don't be so hasty to share your opinions. The king sent out letters to the people of all his provinces in which it was written that every man shall wield authority in his own house. Now we're skipping down to Esther 1:22, right? But after they said, you can't allow your wife, the queen, to be impertinent to you, because then the women of the whole empire will be impertinent to their husbands. So you have to send out a decree that just as you are going to take care of business with her, so all the men should be taking care of business in their homes. Absolutely sexist, patrician, terrible. And this was, issued as a decree throughout the whole Persian Empire. That every man shall wield authority in his own house and speak according to the language of his people. Rava said, were it not for the first letters sent by Ahashverush, which everybody discounted, there would not have been any left among the enemies of the Jewish people, meaning the Jewish people themselves, not a remnant nor a refugee. Right? These first letters that the king sent out into the empire, saying every man is going to be the king of his own home, is like, why is the king telling us that? Right? Like already everybody is the king of his own house, especially if he lives alone, right? Since these first letters were the subject of ridicule, people didn't take the king seriously and did not immediately act upon the directive of the later letters calling for the Jewish people's destruction. It doesn't even say, you're hereby empowered to be, ruling over your wife. They already were. That was already a totally sexist patriarchal society. And it didn't even say that. It just said every man is a king in his own castle. Like what was the king saying to them? People started making fun of it. Like, why is he issuing, ambiguous, weird decrees? And the Gemara continues, the reason that the first letters were not taken seriously is that they who received them would say, what is this that he has sent to us, that every man shall wield authority in his own house? This is obvious. Even a lowly weaver is a commander in his house. If so, why did the king find it necessary to make such a proclamation? And the verse describes, and now we move on to a new subject, the verse describes Ahashverush's search for a new wife by stating, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan the castle. Now we're at Esther 2:3. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said, what is the meaning of that which is written? In everything a prudent man acts with knowledge, but a fool unfolds his folly. Proverbs 13:16. The verse highlights the difference between two kings' approaches to finding a wife. I'm almost done. I'm coming to questions and comments, so get them in. Right, so now the way that King Ahashverush, with the counsel from his advisor Haman, went about finding his new wife shows what a schmuck he was, right? What a fool he was. And this is going to be compared to the way King David acted when he was searching for a wife. So in everything, a prudent man acts with knowledge. This statement is referring to David, who also was looking for a wife for himself. And as it is written, 1 Kings 1:2, and his servants said to him, let there be sought for my lord, the king, a young virgin. Since he sought one maiden, whoever had a daughter brought her to him, for everybody wanted his daughter to be the king's wife. With regard to the continuation of the verse, but a fool unfolds his folly, this statement is referring to Ahashverush. As it is written, and let the king appoint officers to seek out many maidens, since it became clear that the king would have relations with all of them, but in the end he would choose only one as his bride, so whoever had a daughter hid her from him. It's all in how you market the endeavor. And King David marketed it much better. But King David went about it much better. He was just seriously looking for a wife, right? Ahashverush was looking for a queen, yeah, but he was sleeping with all of them, and the ones he had slept with were then placed in a harem, where because they had slept with the king, they couldn't go back out in the population, but he didn't want them again, so it's like a terrible life that they were going to leave. I mean, who's going to want to volunteer for that, Esther did end up in that process somehow, I think against her will, and then, fate ordained or God ordained that she would rise to the top of that horrific process. But, that was not really the right way to go about finding a queen. All right, let us go to your comments and questions. Jeremy Green, I am struggling with the merit thing. But it does make perfect sense. You have to know that you're worthy, I guess. I'm not sure when you wrote that what you were responding to. But right earlier in the page, we did have this idea, the discussion of what did they do to merit that God would punish them, and what did they do to merit that God would save them, right? It's a very Jewish way of approaching things. That's gone it's almost like, forbidden talk after the Holocaust, because if you're saying that the Jewish people bring upon themselves calamities, well, then how can you explain the Holocaust? That's not something we brought upon ourselves. No one was deserving of that. But I think it's the real wisdom of the teaching is to say, look, terrible things happen in the world. Terrible things happen in seemingly random patterns. We trust God that there's a reason for all of this. And if something terrible has happened to our people, or something terrible has happened to our community, or something terrible has happened in my family, or something terrible has happened to me, then I have a choice, a free choice to say, this terrible thing happened. What meaning can I derive from it? What inspiration can I take from it to do some good that I wouldn't have done otherwise? Bill, clarification. Does the word court in the court, garden, palace arrangement have the same potential connotation that it has in English of both a space, courtyard, and the place where the king is in the center of attention, literally holding court? I would say yes. I would say yes. I'm really not the one to ask because my Hebrew is weak. But in that, where am I? I think we'd have to dig in deeper to really get it. Wait a minute. Court, king, palace, court, garden, palace. Where is it? Just give me 1 second. I think I'm just not going to have an answer for you today. I'm not going to have an answer to that, but I would say yes, because, we often see in terms of the word shar, gate, right? That you will inherit the gates of your enemies, or that Mordecai sat at the gate, right, of the king's palace. That the gate is not just the entrance, like that is a place of judgment. And likewise, I think that the king's court definitely has that connotation. But you probably yourself have friends who are real Hebrew experts in your studies, Bill. So let us know. Sharon, yet there is a large movement to build up Vashti as a woman who stood up to her husband, refusing to come out naked, and the Midrash is certainly condemning her as a non-honorable woman. Right, so I'm not sure the source of that large movement to build up Vashti. Maybe that's a more modern sensibility. But yeah, in terms of the sages and these midrashic expositions, they're very negative on Vashti, that's for sure. But that's what's so beautiful about every verse of Scripture, right? It just has so many different levels. And as we see, the sages themselves hold diametrically opposite viewpoints on many questions. So, all those possibilities and interpretations are there. And then the question is always, what do we do with them? Bill, I wonder though if the sages aren't overlooking something more political in Vashti's refusal. As queen of the Persian Empire, she had a political power base of her own, right? She's the daughter of Belshazzar. And while that can indeed be boosted by being, skilled in certain arts, shall we say, it couldn't bear being humiliated in front of the same men she would need to manipulate and negotiate with to get her policies through. Absolutely. She was right to say no. I don't think they're saying she was wrong to say no. She was right to say no. She was just wrong in whatever licentious behavior went on before that. And I think an interesting question we might ask is, well, clearly we have the sense that God was manipulating events, and this behavior and the feast and what led to Vashti being deposed set the scene for Esther being elevated. But we might ask, just as Mordecai will later expose this assassination plot against Ahashverush, Bigdan and Tarshish were the names of the plotters. But perhaps there were other, there's always plotting, the intrigues of the court of an empire like that, whether it's Game of Thrones or Dune or, we have lots of modern examples from fiction and history, just talking about the intrigues of court. And there may well have been forces in that court sort of, manipulating the drunken bawdy talk till it would get to a point where Vashti would be deposed, because maybe, there were centers of power that would benefit from, her fall from power, as it were. Okay, that's it, my friends. So today is December 24th. Tomorrow is Shabbos for us, but we want to wish our friends who celebrate Christmas a very Merry Christmas. May this holiday be one of joy and great meaning and warmth for you and all your families. And I look forward to being with you again tomorrow night when Shabbos ends. We're in the winter, so relatively early, when we'll continue this very colorful exposition of the verses of Esther with Daf Yud Gimel, page 13, tomorrow night, God willing. Good Shabbos, Merry Christmas, and have a wonderful rest of Friday.